Hello everyone and welcome to CripChat, another exciting year for us here at CripChat Australia. And what better way than to start our year with the amazing Hannah.
Hi
Welcome Hannah
guys.
to the show. How's it going?
Good. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited we could finally line this up.
That's awesome. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show, Hannah.
Yeah,
So Hannah,
great to be here.
let's get started. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay, so I'm Hannah Diviney. I'm 25. I have cerebral palsy. So you can't see right now, obviously, because this is only my head and shoulders, but I am sitting in a wheelchair because that's how I navigate the world. I'm sitting in a manual wheelchair. You guys probably know the ins and outs of cerebral palsy, but in case someone has stumbled upon CripChat for the first time, I will give you a quick overview. So basically, cerebral palsy is a physical disability that impacts my fine and gross motor skills. In non-scientific English, that means it impacts everything from my ability to walk, stand, and balance to like being able to use a knife and fork properly, or coordination, handwriting, all that kind of stuff. The reason I am on this podcast as a guest, I think, is because I am a disability advocate, a writer, an author, an actor, and media personality.
Right. Nice. Now, thank you for that, Hannah. So, tell us what got you into, producing, writing, being an author, and all those awesome titles I have.
Yeah, so for me, I've wanted to be an author since I was 4 years old, so that was the easy part in terms of always kind of having that direction and knowing what I wanted to do. In terms of being an advocate, that was actually a label I rejected for a really long time, especially as a teenager, because I was determined not to be defined by my disability, and I wanted as little to do with it as possible beyond like the absolutely necessary parts. But in saying that, my childhood has always had some level of advocacy and interest in fundraising because my parents and grandparents have always had and have always instilled in me that it's important to give back. So we used to do the City to Surf as a family and raise money for people's equipment. So this was before the NDIS existed, when you would have those giant waiting lists of like 6 months or more for equipment. We would raise a couple of $1,000s and say, okay, well, whoever the next person is on the list will try and raise what they need for their equipment. And then Jonathan's right. When I was a teenager, I co-founded an event called the Crazy Cozzy Climb, which sees people with cerebral palsy and their families climb Mount Kosciuszko, which is one of the highest summits in the world and the highest point in Australia. I co-founded that with a friend of mine, Mickey Campbell, who is something of an endurance athlete. And he was just teasing me, I guess, and sort of talking about all the different challenges that he's completed. I'm a naturally curious person, so I would always ask loads of questions, and he said, well, how about we do something? And I was like, yeah, like what? And his original plan was for us to do Kilimanjaro, which is obviously in Africa. And my family were like, whoa, we might need to scale it back a bit because there are a few more logistical challenges traveling that far. And in those conditions for people with disabilities, obviously African countries have less resources and support than Australia does. So then we decided to scale it back to Kosciuszko, and in February we will do our 10th event, which is really cool. And for me, to go back a step, the decision to embrace my identity as an advocate was really born of the COVID pandemic, because basically I could see all of these people who were being left behind or who were being made to feel as though their concerns around COVID weren't serious and legitimate. There were a lot of people treating it like a fun novelty, when in reality we know that COVID has significant impact on people with disabilities' lives and puts a lot of people with disabilities at risk. So based off that, and based off an article that I happened to write around the same time for the ABC about how people could be advocates and allies, and I started to assume that identity, and now here we are, all these years later. Now I can see
That's awesome.
questions here from Jonathan around fundraising and how I think it's changed, and advice for people with disabilities. Something that I'm really, really proud of about the Crazy Cosy Climb is it involves the people with cerebral palsy, so it involves the people who are being fundraised for, whereas a lot of fundraising events that are more traditionally corporate will have people like feeling like they're doing a good deed because they're doing a golf day or they're going to a ball or whatever. And the role of disabled people in those events is to simply like tug at the heartstrings and to make people like open their wallets. They don't have any agency and they don't have any control. And also the people who are fundraising and donating, as well intentioned as they are, have often relatively no exposure to what the actual reality of living and trying to achieve in a disabled body is like. But with the Crazy Cosy Climb, they do, and they have multiple hours to get to know the families and to get to kind of try and at least understand a little bit more. So that's something I'm really proud of, and that's how I think fundraising has changed. Hopefully, the way we run our event is kind of a model for how other people will do it in the future. And then I guess in terms of giving people advice, I think you just have to really be clear about what you're fundraising for, what your story is, what your purpose is, and then rely on your community as much as you can. Don't be afraid to use social media if that's something that's accessible to you, because you never know where a tweet or an Instagram post might end up. The beauty of social media for the disabled community especially is that with a click of a button, we are far more connected to the world than we have ever been. And you never know how far something could travel or who might lend a hand.
Awesome. No, that's good. That's the beauty of social media, I guess. So, what was your experience of writing your first book like? And did the process change you in any way?
So my experience of writing my first book was like going to therapy every day for a couple of months. I felt like I needed to have my psychologist on speed dial. But I think the process was a very much like an excavation or almost like an exorcising of like stuff that I've struggled with. It forced me to confront certain things. It forced me to have conversations with friends that I haven't had. It hopefully brought them closer into understanding my world a little bit in ways that I might not have felt comfortable explaining in conversation, because conversation is always a bit more complex, I guess. It's much easier to write stuff down and say it because you can pretend you're just writing for yourself.
So, what was the name of your book?
The name of my book is I'll Let Myself In. It's a series of essays around my experiences growing up disabled and sort of coming to terms with the world around me and trying as hard as I can to educate other people on what that experience is like without necessarily sounding like I'm trying to educate them.
What was the inspiration behind, writing that book?
I think it was basically because I always thought that when I became an author, the first thing I would write and the thing I've always planned on writing was a novel, which is kind of where I'm at now. I'm sort of starting to look at fiction and creating worlds and characters that are different to me. I do have other ideas for writing projects, stories, novels, scripts, all sorts of things, sitting in various stages on my laptop, and I guess we'll just see what the next one is. I think the thing that I'm really focused on at the moment is probably a novel, but who knows? I'm open to whatever happens, and there's no real timeline on what comes first. But yeah, when I started to think seriously about what it would look like to become a writer, there was kind of a little voice in the back of my head that just said, you need to at least start to try and come to terms with, make peace with your story first before you get to tell other people's. And I think that's definitely still a work in progress. It's not complete. I think I saw before that you guys were asking, like, when have I become comfortable with CP? Like, what are some moments that I've become comfortable? And I would say it's still a work in progress. It's kind of every day. I would say I'm not yet fully comfortable with having cerebral palsy or being who I am, but I'm trying. And part of how I do that is by making art and connecting with audiences and doing stuff like this. And I'm hoping that slowly I'll kind of trick my brain into giving itself the same acceptance that I hope others have.
Yeah, because that's what it's all about. So educating the public on, living with this and also how to, I guess, establish that kind of relationship with the person. You don't want
Yeah.
them to, feel disengaged.
No, and you don't want them to feel like they're being lectured or like they're being talked down to either, or like they're being punished for a lack of knowledge or a lack of exposure or experience. That's not helpful. You have to meet people where they are, and that's a policy that I try and implement in all sorts of ways in my life, not just with disability either.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that, Diana. And was there any, I guess, trepidation in becoming the first person with a disability in Australia to be in a sex scene on television?
What do you think? Yes, there was some trepidation because I think it's always tricky to be the first. And for me, this was also my first acting experience. I don't have any training in acting, so I was learning as I was doing it. So to be confronted with such an intimate script and to also know
Oh,
that I had the responsibility of being that representation for the first time for Australia's whole disabled community, but particularly the physically disabled among us. And it's a piece of history I never thought I would own. Was a lot of pressure, but I'm really proud of Latecomers, the show that scene was a part of. Latecomers is a SBS digital original, so that it was 6 10-minute episodes, but it can be watched as a whole. It's on SBS on demand right now if anyone wants to watch.
oh,
And it basically comes from the premise of two people with cerebral palsy being stuck in a bar because their carers decide to hook up for the night. And from there,
nice.
chaos ensues. But it was written and created by people with cerebral palsy. It features actors who have cerebral palsy in the main roles. It's all very, very kind of excellent. And yeah, I think the value of that representation and the privilege of being trusted to tell that story eventually outweighed the anxiety that I had. And it also really helped that I had a really great relationship with my male co-star who I was doing the scene with, and that intimacy coordinators are now a fixture on Australian sets. So similar to like a stunt coordinator or a fight coordinator or something like that, an intimacy coordinator basically helps you like choreograph the scene so that everyone knows what they're doing, everyone's boundaries are clear, everyone has consent, feels comfy at all times, and it kind of takes the pressure out of it and makes it more of just a job to be doing that stuff rather than to be overlaid with the personal as much. I mean, of course, it's still personal and intimate and vulnerable, but it
Yeah.
helps industry representation. And to answer the question, I can see what work is still needed to create an accessible media industry for people with disabilities. I think that work is large. There's a lot to be done, especially around the physical accessibility of film sets, but also taking into account someone's energy and needs and stuff like that. And that's why Screen Australia is so committed to also, I just spoke about intimacy coordinators for intimate scenes, but they also have these new access coordinators, people who take care of the accessibility needs of cast and crew on set. And they don't necessarily have to be disabled, but in the case of disabled people, it just means that the labor of doing that and the labor of thinking about it is removed a little bit so that we can just focus on our job like everyone else. We have enough in our heads trying to think about lines and cues and scenes and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, that definitely helps, but that needs to grow. And then I think the representation conversation is still missing some huge chunks. We've made some decent strides in the last couple of years with Latecomers, with Heartbreak High, with Wicked, like the fact that someone with a disability is front and center in a kind of blockbuster film is great, but it needs to continue.
Yep.
And disabled actors and disabled crew need to be employed and get work in front of and behind the camera. Disabled stories need to be told, but also people need to be given the space to tell stories where their disability is just a feature of their character rather than the whole thing that drives the plot.
Yeah, also, we need to have more disability representation out there. And
Yeah,
yeah, especially in the media. Thank you for that, Hannah. So my question to you: people with disabilities are commonly depicted as objects of pity or inspiration. Why is needed both in fundraising and media representation to have more realistic and diverse representation?
I think it goes back to what we sort of said throughout this whole
Yeah.
conversation, which is that disabled people need to be the ones in control. They need to be the ones who have the agency and the power to shape and decide how they want to be fundraised for, whether they want to be involved in the activities like leading to the money being raised, and then also just like what I said earlier about giving disabled people the chance to tell more stories in front of and behind the camera that's led by them and led by lived experience.
That's awesome. I guess, do you have any final thoughts or final
Um,
advice you want to add?
I guess I would just say that if people want to connect with my work further, they can follow me on Instagram at Hannah the Wildflower. They can come and join me on Twitter if they're still over there at Hannah_Diviney. That's HANNAHDIVINEY. Yeah, people can always reach out with ideas or if they need support. I'm here. The only way that we make things better, I guess, is through leaning on each other and using community. And yeah, that's what I would say.
Nah, awesome, awesome. Thank you very much, Hannah, for being on the show,
Thank you
allowing
for having
us
me.
to, I guess, speak your brain and sharing your wealth and expertise in, especially when it comes to media and filming. Being, I guess, well, what is that inspiration? But being a leader in the space for people with disability to engage in the, I guess, media.
Oh, that's
Uh,
very kind. Thank you, Ibby. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Hannah, and what a great start to the year. To actually interview Hannah Diviney on CripChat Australia. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
For all the audiences out there, you've been watching CripChat, your weekly podcast on everything disability. Join us next week as we talk about more issues related to disability. Goodbye for now. Thank you, Hannah. See
No
you.
worries. See ya.